In this video, we'll be finally connecting all the missing links which was there previously. So we have a database to store the user's face ID, and we will also dockerize this entire application so that it is packaged in a way that is easily deployable. So before moving on, let me demonstrate to you how the finished product actually works. So in here we have a PgAdmin which is connected to our database. You can see there's 4 entries right now. Let me just, yeah, there's 4 entries right here. So now if I go back here and click on this image, the front end should take 3 different images of the user and save it in the database, right? So I'll click this eye icon. As you can see, it's the webcam is on, and we should see a post request right here. Yep. Yeah, so we've been redirected to the dashboard because the response was successful. As for the payload, we have 3 different files. Response, it's generated 3 unique IDs of the user. So now if I go back to PgAdmin right here and run the SQL command, you can see there's 5 entries. So let me go over the code and how it has changed from the previous video. In our VS Code right here, you can see our Docker container is running, up and running here. And if I go to the Docker desktop, which is a very useful tool, in our containers right here, you can see our multi-container is running, and inside that we have 4 different smaller containers, which is the Postgres face, the front end, back end, and the FastApi, right? So some of the useful tools which you can use, especially when you're using something like Docker and the database and all, is Docker desktop. It makes your life much more easier if you have this installed. You can just interact with your containers much more efficiently here. And the other one is this PgAdmin right here. So when you have database, you can run SQL queries and see the data that is being stored. So these are some useful tools which you may or may not like, but I generally use them. Just give it a go and let me know how you all like it. So as for the code, if we go to let's start with the front end, and I'll show you how to run this Docker compose and all. But let's just start off with the changes which was made from the previous video. So let us go under app. We'll go to page.tsx, and in here we have a face login. Nothing changed here, and in here also nothing has changed. So let me go to Rive canvas. The only change which was made was, before we were capturing 5 images and now we are just capturing 3, just because it was taking a lot more time. 2 seconds for every image was way too much, and I wanted to shorten that duration. So we are capturing just 3 images, which takes about 6 seconds, right? And now if we go to our APIs folder, which is in our front end, so right here what we are doing is, once we have a response or status of 200, we just reroute the user to this dashboard page which was created, which is nothing but which just says welcome to the dashboard. Nothing much has changed in front end, just a few tweaks, that's it. So I'll close the front end part. So that was the only changes which was made in the front end. Now let us go to our backend. So the backend, I believe we've made a little more changes. So we've just added a few more lines of code which gracefully shuts down and disconnects the DB. But the main change which was made is probably this DB connection. So I've installed sequelize, which is the ORM which I chose to make queries to our database. Again, all of this you can find in their documentation. It's pretty straightforward. The only thing is probably this thing, Postgres DB. So what is which is taken from a constants file. So if I go here, okay, so here what we are doing is we are picking environment variables from our env file and inserting it to our to initiate our sequelize. And if it's not there, we just use the localhost 5432, the default values, right? And these environment variables are actually coming from our Docker compose file right here. I'll go over this in a moment. Let's go to Express for now, and that's about it for this file. We just initialize the sequelize, and we just said we have a function for the establishing a connection with the database and disconnecting the connection with our database. That's it for this file. And the other important change which I made was probably this one, multer, and I've realized that I was calling this muttler throughout these videos and it's actually multer, but I'll leave it at as it is. You all can change it if you feel like it. So as far as multer is concerned, before, what we were doing is we were going a directory up, so it was dot dot slash uploads, but when we are actually deploying it to Docker, we'll probably have to change this to like inside this uploads inside the current directory itself. So that's all the changes which was made for the Express. Now let me close all the open editors and move to FastApi, but I don't think there's any changes which was made in here. Everything still remains the same. Nothing has changed, so let's not go over this again. I don't want to repeat myself. So I've not made any changes to FastApi. So now let's get into the more fun part of this video, which is the Docker part. So here what we are doing is, let me actually stop our running instance of our container. So I just control C it and everything is shutting down, right? So if you all want to mimic this project in your devices, what you can do is just pull it from the GitHub, and what you'll have to do is you'll have to enter this command called docker compose up hyphen build, and you just press enter and it should start building your containers, and make sure Docker and all is installed. So once that's done, it might initially it'll take some time. So the first time when you build this, it might take about 5-10 minutes depending on the speed of your application and all, but after that it's much more faster. So once you've done building it, to run your server, all you have to do is press in this command called docker compose and up, which will just start all of your servers, which is your Postgres, FastApi, the Express, and your frontend. So just hit enter and your container should start running, right? So that's how you would start your container. So now let's go over this docker compose YAML file. So here let's start off with Postgres DB. So this is just a service name, and you can literally name it whatever you feel like naming it. I've already actually made a video on Docker. Feel free to just watch it to get a better understanding on how this works. I go in deeper, and yeah, so this basically creates a Docker image for us. So we pull the latest image from Postgres, set the environment variables, and here what is happening is it maps the containers port to our local systems port. The same thing again with FastApi. This is a service name. You can name it whatever you feel like naming it. The build, the context is basically where the Docker file for this service is. So in our case, we are in our directory FastApi, which is right here, and here we have a Docker file. So it just picks that Docker file and starts building it. Again, it maps the port of the Docker to our system. That's what this is. And probably this is the most important thing, which is volumes. So let me go over, I've made a beautiful illustration right here. So since we are okay, let me actually start by saying what volumes is. So whenever you want to persist your data outside of your container, so since we have a multi-container Docker, we have a uploads folder where we save the user's images for a short duration of time. So because we're saving it in a separate folder outside of the container, that is where we use volumes. So volumes is generally used to persist a data outside a container and to share data across different containers. So if you remember right here, we have a next app Express FastApi. We send some images to Express. Express then saves the image to an uploads folder and sends a get request to FastApi. And what basically our AI model does is picks the images from uploads folder and sends the unique ID to Express. Express saves that data in a database, and then it gives the response to next app, and next app basically reroutes the user to the dashboard if it's successful, right? So this is the general flow of our application. So after seeing this image, I just remembered there's another change which I made in our Express application. I apologize because I didn't go over this previously. So if I go to my controller right here, we made some changes to our controller also. So before, what we were doing is, once the user saves some user's images is saved, we used to remove it as well. But I've taken that snippet of code out, just because whenever a new user logins, it just overwrites this images. So it was not necessary. I just removed that. So that was another change which I made with the backend. I promise that's all. I didn't make any further changes. So that's what volume is. We want to share data across our Express app and our Fast API. So that is where volumes come in. We generally use restart when we want our service to always be running regardless of the exit code, and even if our service fails, we basically tell it to start again. Then we define our environment variables, which will be picked when our server runs. Then this depends on, basically tells start this service only after this service, which is our Express.js app. And again, all of this is the same. And yeah, that's it. That's basically the definition of our Docker container, multi Docker container. So now let us dig deeper into these individual Docker files. So these Docker files, you don't have to actually remember anything. All you have to do is go to their documentation, because Docker has a very good documentation because everybody uses it, and you just have to find in the net which one best suits your use case. So even for our application, what I did was, I just went over Google and just typed in like Docker for various servers. So for Fast API, this was the one which I found, and I literally copied it, ran the server. It crashed a few times. Then I realized that the problem was because of this volumes thing right here, because we are persisting data outside a container, we needed to use volumes. So that is the reason why I used this. So yeah, so generally, to get started with Docker, you don't actually need to learn it, because everything is there in the net, and you can just Google it out. So Fast API Docker, that's what I typed in, and this is what came up. I just picked this, copied and pasted it right here. But it is useful to know what actually these keywords mean, at least the main ones, which are these: from basically picks the latest image, work directory, basically tells what is your working directory. Again, this is pretty straightforward. Copy basically says take all the packages of requirements.txt and map it to this app folder and run this command, which basically installs all the packages for us, expose 8000, and the command that should be run to run a server. So that's basically it for Docker. I'm not very well versed in Docker, but for my use case, I think yeah, you don't need to know a lot. Probably when you're getting more advanced or deeper into CI/CD, you'll have to know a little more. But for our application, you don't need to know much. So that's about it. That's all the changes which I made. This is probably the last video of this series. We set out to build a face detection system where we capture the user's images, we send it to the backend, and the AI model generates a unique face ID, and then we persist that data in the database. So I believe we've done that, and we can move on from this project. So I hope by going through all of these videos, you have a vague understanding on how I go about building stuff. I generally just get started, and I realize that I've made some mistakes, and I try to rectify those mistakes. As you can see, we started off with Golang, and then I realized that Golang is not a fit for this, and we changed it to Express. So, and same thing with Flask. We started out with Flask, and we moved on to Fast API. So generally what happens is, us engineers have all these great ideas, but we never get started, and because we never got started, those ideas never come into life. So hopefully, if you have a great idea, just try building it, and hopefully turns into something great. And if you've gone through all of the videos thus far, I want to say from the bottom of my heart, thank you. It means a lot. And hopefully, by going through those videos, you got some value out of it. Thanks, and see you in the next video.